Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Jane, so much. I would like to thank our collaboration since the beginning of, I think was it, I want to say since 2019, 2018, when we first collaborated on just regular connections that we were trying to think about how to add some material to the curriculum or the syllabus that's produced by the Music Center at St. Andrews University. So I really appreciate this invitation, and I'm very glad that we've continued to talk over the years, and that, you know, it sort of, this is like this other stage of that, this communication comes into fruition by this talk that I'm offering today at St. Andrews University through the Music Center. So thank you so much, Jane, Petrie, and thank you so much, the Music Center. And obviously, I'm in a sense, at a doctoral level, St. Andrews University is my alma mater, and I'm very grateful to have studied there, specifically working with Huon Wardle, who was my supervisor in social anthropology. So the talk today comes off of the chapter that, as you mentioned, is being published in the book Hiphop Archives, the Politics and Poetics of Knowledge Production by Mark Campbell and Mary Foreman. And it sort of not only talks about the actual content of the chapter itself, but also describes some of the ideas that come off after the chapter was published, and I take a bit more time to go into some detail about sort of particular things that have to do with sound and music, and it's around the chapter itself and the work of producing a Rap Cubano archive, not only at Harvard University, but also on the ground in Havana, which is part of the work that I'm doing right now. So if you can move to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit quickly about me. Yeah, so I was born and raised in Havana. My name is Pablo D. Herrera Veitia, and I'm an Afro-Cuban poet, rap music producer, practitioner, scholar, and practitioner archivist. And as Jane said quite well, because I'm still a producer, rap music producer, Afro-Cuban rap music producer, I qualify as a practitioner who then has taken on studies at doctoral level, and this is where this practitioner scholar comes in. As a practitioner archivist, it also comes handy to describe myself as such, because I was someone that produced some of these songs that we're archiving today. So my understanding as someone who first created them at as I will describe later on, as what I describe as an operative level, mainly meaning these songs were mainly produced at the time that I was making them in Havana. They were produced to be just performed live. There was no way to actually archive them. Later on, over time, I've just come to realize that we need to do the work of making sure that we preserve them, preserve those songs, and preserve the music itself. And then as such, then I'm working through the assemblage of Africana religion, global hip hop studies, sounded ethnography, and multimodality. And multimodality is mainly ways to describe, and sounded ethnography also is ways to describe ethnographic work. That means anthropological research and the delivery of that research in ways that are that are basically outside or match or mix written renditions. So this is where comes the idea of using sound and text together rather than writing just a journal article where things are only read and you don't get a sensorial or sensory access to the material. So I'm really interested in this sensory access to materials. And then my research interests go specifically, which is what I sort of developed in St. Andrews, is this work on Afro-Cubaneity, which is basically answers to the question what is it to be, or what it's like to be Afro-Cuban in Havana today and in the world as well. And then I'm also very interested in Afrosonic theory. One of the main proponents today is Mark Campbell, who's written a book called Afrosonic Life. And then the second person is Daphne Brooks has also written on Afrosonic theory as well. And we also have someone, a towering figure like Louis Chudes-Okey, who I think is a very, very prominent theorist in Afrosonic studies as well. And then I'm also interested in hip hop archives, as you know, and then the marriage between hip hop archives and digital humanities. That goes not only to the question of archiving rap music in particular locales across the world, but it also means the way in which technology becomes part of the daily practice of hip hop creation and music creation. And then I think the last bit of it is this connection to this idea of technology and the digital humanities. I'm very interested in thinking and creating work that's related to digital Afro-Caribbean sound and ethnography. So I'll show some of that at the end, towards the end of the presentation. So if we can move to the next slide, I'll talk about the structure of the talk today. So the talk today, I will first discuss this question of Afro-Cubaneity as a multidisciplinary assemblage and describe what I believe are its underpinnings. Then second, I'll talk about an Afro-Cuban audio cultura or audio culture, and we actually it's about this world of sound, especially in a city like Havana, where where we can sort of capture or remember or have notes or an understanding of the city through remembering or listening or paying attention to how the city sounds, not only through trucks or the train at the distance, people walking by, or the sounds of life in general, or the audible character of the city itself, but also the music that's played loudly or discreetly around Havana. And then I'll talk about how those songs and sounds then go into rap Cubano in its archives. Next, I'll talk about the differences between the different studio caseros, which are home studios in Havana, starting with mine, Havana Hip Hop, and then going through the next stage, which is 18 a 16 Productions, which is Malcolm Junco Dufay, the late Malcolm Junco Dufay, and then I'll talk about Real 70 as well. And then after discussing sort of what happens on the ground and how do we understand the archive in terms of how to commit to the actual endeavor of creating the archive and what Malcolm wanted, I'll talk about some of the implications specifically in terms of what it means to do an archive in terms of what it represents as a counter archive. And then issues of how, when bringing the archive or collections of rap Cubano into particular institutions in Cuba and outside of Cuba, there's this question of making the objects or materials of rap Cubano, making them discoverable or accessible to the public, or finding, or that we can find them on a finding aid. And then what are the implications of creating such a structure for rap Cubano archives? And then lastly, I'll talk about, just give a quick sort of hint to some of my own reading of the archive and ideas that I draw to create sort of, let's say, narratives of how a particular song or a particular theme, specifically in the case it's sort of poetics of protest in urban Afro-Cuban music, how do I see a particular theme just so being drawn over a long durée, say from 1959, which is the year of the Cuban Revolution, and then up until recently in 2021. So how it's sort of a few instances of what should be described as a sonic history of rap Cubano or an Afro-Cuban sonic history. Now I'll get to that. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So in principle, this slide is Afro-Cubaneity and Africana religions and global hip hop studies assemblage. I like to start by explaining that first and foremost, I'm a practitioner also of Lukumi Orisha Ifá practice, and my understanding of or production of theory and theorization of ideas that I do I use Ifá divination and Lukumi Orisa Ifá practice to think about the issues that I do in my research, or the issue, or the questions that I have in my research. I first pass them through Ifá divination, and then find an oracular figure that would allow me to situate the case of, for example, the case of archiving. In the case of archiving, I found that the oracular figure, and then before I go into oracular figures, if you see here on the right, if you see this sort of block of 16 different images sort of down, this is in other words, it's in the world of Arabic culture, it's called a geomancy. But in the world of Yoruba, these are in the Yoruba world in Ifá divination, these are the 16 principles of Ifá divination. So their combination is what produces an oracle figure, and then from that particular combination then has several prescriptions that most of them and all of them are have implications that have to do with what to do ethically, and moral prescriptions, and in ways in which humans should behave in society and take on life and fulfill their life purpose. So in the case of archives, I found that in conversation with other practitioners as well, I found that this figure that's on top of the candle, if you see it, it's called Osakuleya. It's Osa Ogunda, and it's the figure that describes the creation of libraries and what they mean as repositories of knowledge, or the accumulation of knowledge, and what should we be doing with that knowledge. So ways to operate that knowledge, ways to access it, and we should be using in practice on the everyday, and then how that knowledge that we have, once we understand it, we should put it into practice. I'll read just the last paragraph to explain how is it that the nature of current rap Cubano archives, and how do they accommodate rap Cubano immaterial properties defined by legacy of Afro-Cuban anti-racism and the recent history of Afro-Cuban efforts towards social inclusion and post-socialist subjectivities that produce rap Cubano and its socio-political edge. These are all drawn as questions as you see them here, but what I mean is that part of the main purpose of creating this archive has to do with making sure that the memory of the impact in Cuban society and the function of rap Cubano in Cuban society is well understood, not only by society, but by the makers and producers of it itself, or themselves, and making sure that we know what is it that we mean by this practice of both historicity and practice of history making, and practices of memory making, and its historiographical sort of appeal, and in the ways that we try to create this archive that we're doing. Can I ask a question for people in the audience? Do you follow me so far? Am I making sense? Do you have any questions at this point?
We've got a boundary mic here. Yeah, broadly, yes. We're understanding that for you, making an archive is not just governed by the kinds of ideas that come from kind of European ideas about library, but that you're using a particular insight that talks about an Afro-Cuban understanding of knowledge transmission and conservation and seeking out. And also, I think, to underline the point that you make in that third paragraph, that the kind of revolutionary, the socialist aspect of Cuba has been for this drive to inclusion, that that everybody should have access to knowledge, and the social imperative of sharing knowledge is important to you culturally as well. Yeah?
Yes.
Grand. Good, thank you. Shall I change slides?
Yeah, let's go to the next slide.
There we go.
So then, in terms of Afro-Cubaneity and its underpinnings, I want to again reiterate. I'm going to read this. I'm a born and raised Negro Habanero, literally an Afro-Cuban man from Havana. And I grew up in the neighborhood of Santa Suarez, right at the geographic center of the city. The claim to be Afro-Cuban seems to be self-evident to me, but what is Afro-Cubaneity? This inquiry, this is my I think the core of my doctoral and academic inquiry is related to the exploration or exploring this question through a study of the audible character of Afro-Cuban life in Havana in its relation to Afro-Cuban citizenship in a pluralizing and cosmopolitan cultural milieu. I'm interested then in the ways in the category Afro-Cuban describes the sonic manner of being and doing, and in tracing these questions through a dialogue with members of my family and my Lukumi Orisa Ifá practitioner network. As an anthropological inquiry, then Afro-Cubaneity follows. This is really important here. Sylvia Winter's exploration of the lived experience of being Black. And by being Black here, is lowercase specifically because I don't want it to be affiliated with the uppercase Black, which is used within North America to describe experience of people who are darker skin or mixed race. I feel like out of lived experience, I feel, and this is something I should say, I'm not saying that I'm not a Black person in terms, but I feel like my experience being from socialist Cuba and that of my co-natives, and what I'm saying by co-natives is like specifically the people who did hip hop in Havana, I don't think that we qualify as Black, as uppercase Black people. I think we qualify as dark-skinned, lowercase Black Black people. And then the question that comes or follows out of that is, what is it to be like to be Afro-Cuban in Havana today? And this is the core of the question. And this framing, this paragraph comes of what I wrote for my research proposal prior to starting the PhD at St. Andrews. And so it sort of, I feel like it sort of locates what exactly I'm trying to say with this work that I'm doing. So this is why there's a major focus on not only on hip hop itself, but the sound of music and sounds within the city in Havana. I feel like at some point there was it's a very important shift that I experienced when I was doing my sound design degree at Edinburgh University, where I actually had to go back to Havana at some point during the master's, and I realized that the city, the way the music that my neighbors were playing changed from boleros, which we'll get to when we start listening to music, to more reggaeton-like, which I may play toward the end. So I was actually very, very curious about understanding what that shift meant, in a very Italian sort of juxtaposed kind of way of thinking, where he positions the idea, or he advances the idea, that music is prophetic of social change, or music, the music that we play or listen to today gives us an idea of where society is moving. So I'm always being very interested in these questions of diagnosing what the future will be like before it happens. And so the main core of this work, thank you for that, Clyde. The main core of this work is to do an archaeology of the present, is to do a history of the present, and a focus on not exactly the past. Like, we do delve in the past, as you'll see from the music and some of the years that we're playing, but we're really focused on how is it that the past is connected to what's happening today, and how that conversation then speaks about possibilities of the future, right? So now, in terms of an Afro-Cuban audio cultura, sounds and songs of rap Cubano, I'd like to play the first track, Jane, if that's possible. Is that loud enough for you guys there?
Muchas personas que han oído al Señor, pero lo cierto es que nadie ha visto a Dios. El mundo va a acabarse y la gente como pide cuando están obstinados. Yo digo esto porque aquí hay acomplejado, una tonga de racista, una pila de descarados que van a la iglesia y están fanatizados, se pasan dando muelas.
That's beautiful.
Pero se acaba el mundo si su hija trae un nichato.
That's perfect, Dave. That's perfect. Yeah, so So the reason why I chose this track is because I want to emphasize this question of how hip hop itself is practiced and the work that we did in Havana and continue to do in Havana. It's connected to very sort of lowercase or micro practices of history making that come off the work of hip hop itself. That are outside of the institution and what these institutions understand and how institutions organize and regulate the materials that then they make accessible for the people. What I'm showing here in this picture, you see the back is my MPC and my mixer. This is the living room of my house. I'm sorry I won't have that much time to talk about what you see in the background, but that's my equipment and the equipment that I use to make this music that you're seeing in the front, that you listened to just now. The track itself is from Reyes de la Calle, and it's my first album, the Cuban Hip Hop All Stars album, Volume 1. And this is from 2000. The record is from 1999, but it was released in 2001, and then the actual copyright says 2002. But I would like to play, in this question of, I'm going to play a few examples. In this question of doing history with music and how hip hop remembers, how hip hop it intrinsically listens to history and the past. I like to play the sample that I used for that song. Yeah, perfect. So this is a track, La Habana Joven by Los Van Van. And I think it's a beautiful track. So part of the idea in this question about audio cultura is using sounds or samples that were mainly produced by Cuban artists or tracks that were mainly popular within the Havana audible sort of sphere. If we can move to the next slide, please. Yeah, so this is again the idea of boleros specifically. What we heard before was songo music by Van Van. This is more of a bolero and contemporary orchestration. Can we play Bajo Presión, please?
Real 70, producciones independientes, dedicado a mi gente, Chacal, Sandy Acosta, Pelón, Bajo Presión. Yo. Así es esta vida, bajo presión. Caminar por las calles, bajo presión. De libres pensamientos, malas miradas, bocas sucias, erróneas, los que señalan. Así es esta vida, bajo presión. Caminar por las calles, bajo presión. De libres pensamientos, malas miradas, bocas sucias, erróneas, los que señalan. Bajo presión, soy certificado de lucha, garantía, supervivencia hasta nuestros días. Somos la guía de lo que una vez se formó un gran día. La guía que sigue funcionando grandes ideas.
And then can we play the sample? Beautiful sample. It's a bolero by Fernando Alvarez, and it's Dos Gardenias. It's a classic song and Cuban repertoire by Isolina Carrillo. The song obviously is older, but the actual track is from 1977. This album came in 2004, so you see this correlation between what was the present in 2004 and how we were listening to the past, which is very, very common within hip hop to be listening to the era of funk in the 1970s. But the Cuba, those who are familiar with that era of music, there's very, very, very American influences and tones in the way the orchestration was created. Very funk driven, I would say. Can we play the next sample, please? And this is another example from, I think it's kind of even an older classic. And this is going back all the way to 1957. I'd like to play Pablo's No Confunda, please. For 45 seconds, please. That's good. Yeah, and then obviously a cumbanchero, which before you play it, Jane, I want to make sure that we understand the context. This is a song. It's a classic of Latin American music or Latino music or Latin music by Rafael Hernandez Marin, the Puerto Rican composer. The song itself, I would argue that the song itself were probably taken by this incredible ensemble called Sabu. That if you know, I don't know if those people who know Afro-Cuban music or popular Cuban music, you see the person in front sitting down is Arsenio Rodriguez, who's playing the tres on this track. So Rafael Hernandez, being a Puerto Rican man in the 1950s, traveled to Havana and met with this artist. We know that there's many confluences and ways in which the music was shared. But as we know, the cumbanchero itself is a major track of Latin music. One note of interest is that the actual track that I produced was used without any rights by. It's actually played in the TV series Dexter. I need to still find ways to see if I can get some money from it. I haven't been able to do it yet, but please play that track, cumbanchero, please. Fabulous. Thank you. Yeah. So in this way, I feel like part of the impetus to then understand the reasons behind doing archival work come from the practice of hip-hop archival, hip-hop practice itself as being in and of itself very ingrained in understanding the past and using the past to make statements about the present. I wanted to play, if we can go to that other slide before we play it, Jane. So this is where the work of using these songs and what they mean in terms of their relationship to the past and the relation to the present and the future comes into how they arrived at the archive and the collection that I created at the Hiphop Archive Research Institute of the Hutchins Center at Harvard University. If we can play that first track. Important here, Jane, just a moment. So what you see here is that this conversation with the past, in these two tracks that we're going to listen to now, common samples that some of them that I don't wanna disclose, but also this conversation where we use instruments or arrangements within the track itself that speak to other sort of conversations that happened in the past to music compositions. So if we can play it now, yeah. Is it bata drums added to the track?
Batalla dura, premura, horas maduras, yo cruda negrura, raíz de mis sentimientos, tronca de pensamientos, tamaña fortaleza natural, belleza descomunal, inspiras tú mis creaciones, mama, remueve mis emociones, ceiba real de mi raza, lengua suelta mi bocaza, y loco naces, creces, te estremeces de noche de día, susurrando melodías, libertad femenina activa, pura tradición, negra y loco revolución, cruda África viva, vibra el compás del tambor, pereguana florecida, azotada por el sol,
Thank you there. Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure that it's understood how even where there are not actual samples, the music itself mixes Yoruba music in the way it is understood in Cuba, and the tradition of bata drumming in Cuba, to make a statement in the present about Afrocentric understandings of society. Can we play the second track, please? Obviously, just before, this is a track by Crudas, which is it's an LGBTQ trans group, the first one in Havana. The track is from 2001, but obviously the record came out as an academic edition in vinyl in 2019. Yeah.
Mi lengua africana te está a decir, muchacho, que estos son los espíritus que siguen bailando mambo. Si tú no me conoces, mejor tú me respetas. Cuando yo te abrí la boca, no hay quien se atreva. Ahora te hablan los mismísimos muertos. Quien te da su bendición y te invita a su concierto. Yo no te creer que tú me estés mintiendo. Tú no te creer en mí. ¿Qué tú estás haciendo? Ahora mismitico yo me voy para los montes. De donde mismo vine y mis secretos se esconden. Porque es que el hombre no respeta al hombre. Principios y conceptos. ¿Dónde se esconden? Muchas veces pregunto y nadie responde. Es que están muy ocupados buscando su nombre. Yo no estoy de acuerdo como viven los hombres, menos mal que te su muerto. No soy un hombre en caria. No soy un hombre en caria. Son los espíritus.
Loma y machete, no somos esclavos ya. Loma y machete, ya no hay grillete más. Que ya los chaván, a los montes. Que va para los chaván, a los montes. No somos esclavos ya. Loma y machete, ya no hay grillete más. Loma y machete, que ya los chaván, a los montes. Que va para los chaván, a los montes.
Thank you. Yeah, so something really important about this track is a track that speaks about this question of marronage, and we had the imagine in the Havana when the song was produced in 2002, we managed to go and play this song for juvenile prisoners or in Cuba at a state prison for young black men at state prison. So we always thought about what it meant to create a song like this and then go play it at a space like that, played it within the prison for young men and talk about maroonage. So I think this track is specifically Loma y Machete has just lots of connotations. It's talking about, how initiates of Orisa, Lukumi Orisa Ifá practice will go to the bush and become maroons again if they need to. The track it's been studied by several people. It's used, but I think it's a really, really important sort of item there within the collection that's at the Ida Kuhn Loeb Music Library at Harvard University, and also is part of the Cuban Hip-Hop archive that I'm creating now. So with these tracks that I played, I wanted to make sure that it's understood why this impetus, or what's described by David Scott as this historiographical demand that hip-hop then takes. This is something that comes out of the world of anthropology and basically Caribbean studies, to then understand why tracks like this make sense in the context, not only in the context of Cuba, but if you open the lens a bit to the context of the Caribbean and what it means, what do the songs mean in the context of the Caribbean and the African diaspora, where there's conversations about fugitivity, Afro-pessimism, Afrofuturism. What do these tracks mean in that context? Before we go to the next slide, I think something that's important in this context too, in this question is of what exactly arrives at the archive is the fact that a lot of the music that was produced between 1995 in Havana and 2004, which is what the archive is basically collecting, alongside samples that we used, is how uncomfortable some of the music may sit within the structure of an institution like the National Library of Cuba, and also within the space of Harvard University. So the next video that I'm showing now is a video that I created about Malcolm Odù Ifá, who is, I would say, is the foremost archivist of rap Cubano. And he's the person who's designed and understands what categories and what sort of infrastructure we should use to create the archive. Can you play this video, please?
Bueno, miren, aquí les voy a explicar mejor. Aquí tenemos un disco duro que se llama Master, rap cubano, donde tengo un backup de casi todos los raperas, rap, new rap, no rap, old school, porque aquí es donde tengo todo. Pero realmente venimos aquí y aquí hay una carpeta que se llama Master Rap Cubano, archivo. Le damos ahí esta carpeta tiene todo la información desde Pinar del Río hasta Ciudad de Ávila, que ya está organizada. Esta información todavía hay que terminarla de organizar porque se estaba recogiendo más información de los mismos artistas que aparecen aquí. Por ejemplo, Pinar del Río, en estas tres carpetas, que estas tienen las carpetas las tienen todas las provincias. Aquí hay de 2 veces yo, que tienen, por ejemplo, casi toda su música está organizada, es decir, porque ya la tengo organizada, que tengo que terminar de organizarla aquí. Tiene audiovisuales, ¿no ves? Son todos los audiovisuales de 2 veces yo. Están los compinches, tú entras a los audiovisuales, tienen todos los audiovisuales, entra la música y es igual, ¿no ves? Por orden de discos. Pero esta carpeta viene de Río, todavía falta por organizar, pero si vamos a un ejemplo, a la misma Habana, vemos que aquí hay Tercera Roca, Adrián Cibarón González, Adversario Albani. Yo voy a empezar a darle aquí para que vean hasta cuándo. Estos son, cantidad de información que hay. Y un ejemplo, si buscamos...
Great. So as you before we go to the next slide, as you can see, then the Rap Cubano archive that we're producing comes of this use of Windows, Windows and Windows Explorer to create folders and archive or compile files that have a very simple structure. But then I think what's really important here is what exactly should this archive look like? In places like Harvard University, the interface looks different. It's been more combined in a way that their institution understands it. Our archives, which is, I think, primordially this type of structure that comes off of, basically using Windows computers, which actually was mainly accessible in Havana, or is still the most accessible stuff in Havana, comes of creating folders with recordings that were produced by those who were active in home studios, who were the first to start accumulating recordings of rap Cubano and songs that they would sample to make rap Cubano beats. And so what's really interesting in this case, and before I ask questions, is this type of how do we create then categories for rap Cubano? Do we follow the structures and infrastructure or understandings of what should be basically the themes that we should highlight for people who read the outside, or should we orient the archive itself as the way the community of raperos and the community that actually attends rap concerts would understand the best? This means that then the categories that we created come of what people understand. Like, for example, recently I had a conversation with Peter Lawrence from the Edacon Music Library at Harvard, and what he showed me was, it's like, well, we need more information, but then when we think about how we will create the archive that we would do, it doesn't give as much information as the one that Harvard or the National Library in Cuba would require to make this qualify as an actual archive, more than just a collection of songs in folders in the computer. So if you go to the next slide, then I'll ask questions and ask if everyone is with me so far. Is everyone, are we all here with me? Do you understand so far where we're going?
Yep, we're all good. Thank you for breaking down the sampling so clearly. I really was hearing how various different strands of tradition were being taken forward into rap sampling, and that breakdown was hugely useful. It's also really interesting. Can I ask a question, Pablo?
Of course. This, yeah.
So I understand what you're saying, that the Windows file structure doesn't have the kind of bibliographical library additional information that a more conventional library archive might have. I just wanted to ask, when you're dealing with file structures like, Microsoft File Finder, you're dealing essentially with a hierarchical structure where the high level categories are fairly, once you've started setting that up, it's quite difficult to change direction. Is that a problem?
And that's a wonderful question, because it speaks about in a very sort of, if you open the lens as much as we think, how is it that we can do what exactly does it mean to produce or Rap Cubano's digital born files, their MP3s or wave formats? When they're born, right? There's recordings that we create, they're born into the structures of our structures that speak not only about MS-DOS command or Windows, but speak about particular relationships with power and technology as a manifestation of hegemony and coloniality, if we think about it. Do you understand what I mean there?
I love the idea of a Microsoft file structure being a manifestation of hegemonic power. I think that's a very fun way to think.
It totally is. I mean,
it certainly encodes a kind of, you've inherited from the past all the stuff that's part of the past's idea of, the way that things have come to be manifest is then preserved in the structure of knowledge that you're carrying forward. And that's very interesting.
Exactly. But then a bit of a push in that direction then is that it's to understand also that hip hop is born within the structure of power that creates that hierarchy and destroys that and destroys the bottom. Constantly destroys the bottom. If people talk about, for example, people, those who know hip hop history, being born in the Bronx and actually coming off of Jamaica, coming off of the Caribbean, and then being sort of blossoming in New York City at the Bronx, and then being innovated across its diaspora in like the west coast of the United States and Cuba, Africa. It always comes from this sort of almost lower levels where the relationship and the look upwards or bottom up look is the drive to produce the music itself. So what I'm actually implying here is through this question of technology and this question of digital humanity, which is basically the first inkling of it, is this issue that anything this called that may be called or devised as digital born in this even the most revolutionary, most radical music is tied to technology and to coloniality and to hegemony in a way that is almost unbreakable. Because otherwise we will have our own. Does that make sense? We will have our own.
So there was a comment just from another person in the room. I just want to give a chance. Sorry, a few minutes ago you said something and we didn't capture it.
Of course, well, the thing is that you guys are structuring this through Windows because you have to. It's very much the idea that, we're talking about the hegemony of your lives and the hegemony of society you live in, and you guys are actually stuck in the structures that exist because of this, because of the direct poverty of your lives, of not being at Harvard and being able to, you guys are literally stuck where this archive is there, and will continue to be probably, even with your academic, and that's an interesting thing as well. But then you've got to imagine that most of the people who might want to access the archive might be there too.
Did you catch that, Pablo?
Yeah, I catch can you say just the last couple of sentences and clear it? So if you can come closer to the mic, it'd be great.
Actually, the people who might want to access the archive might be the kind of people who might be at that sort of level as well. You might get more folk who might be interested in, hip-hop, Cubana archive that are working class and from whatever intersections than maybe people who go to Harvard or would use the kind of. That's interesting in and of itself.
Thank you. So I think was something that's really interesting here in terms of what you just mentioned, which is I think is brilliant. It's a way in which power is so omnipresent and hegemony is so wide, is so broad. It contains its own dissidence. It contains commentaries about and it not only contains it also entertains its own sort of counter archive and ways in which the working classes or the lower classes may be sort of vying for its demise ultimately, and critiques of it, which people tend to say, well, this is a kind of a commentary on democracy in some ways, but I'm very interested in the way in which, for example, Walter Rodney has described the capacity of the libraries in the global north have to take on particular commentaries that come from communities that are dissenting communities, but then this actual archive puts in display or displays for folks who can basically access those archives or those materials at their leisure. And this is what's really complicated, where in the case of what actually arrives at the archive, right? In the case of Rock Cubano, and if this is something that I say in my text, Rock Cubano in the archive, is that what actually arrives at the archives is not exactly the revolution that happened in the streets when the songs were produced and people made them live in Havana, for example. What arrives at the archive following Akili Mbembe is the debris of that revolution. The material culture that arrives, or the immaterial culture that arrives at the archive itself, is not that active moment of fury that happens on stage. It's almost like a token of it. That's what we actually have access to when we go to the library. I want to say, for example, that in the case of Cuba, at the National Library, there was a collection that was produced by some folks within the Havana rap scene, and it created another issue in terms of how people access and what they actually access and the understanding that they drew out of the archive itself. For example, in the case of the National Library of Havana, the person who created the collection, the archivist collection, and I emphasize on the idea that it's a collection. It's been described as not having or not meeting the requirements to be called an archive, and this is very problematic as well, as you saw in the case of what we saw with Malcolm, is that he then could make decisions and understandings based in saying, well, the way the Cuban government related to hip hop in the early years defeats the idea that the Cuban government did something against hip hop in Cuba. The Cuban government basically annihilated or basically, I don't know what, let's just say, exterminated hip hop in some way or fought really hard against it. And it's really interesting because it creates ways in which archivists themselves then contradict the history of what was said, because they're using this debris, they're using this sort of ruins of the actual revolution that happened, rather than ways in which the revolution could be represented. So what I'm trying to lead to here is that part of what arrives, and this is something that I saw recently, some of what arrives at the archives, especially Rap Cubano archive, is this dead history, right? Is this dead materials that are not exactly lifeless, but they're ultimately evocative of a moment that is past already. Now, what's really implied here, I think is really important then, is to understand then the nature of hip hop itself and where its stage in which it is today. Does that make sense?
Yep, I think so. Shall we?
Yeah, let's go to the next slide, please.
Yep. Is that all right on this slide here, Rap Cubano and its archives, yeah?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I framed it in.
Yeah.
I can share the slides later if anyone would like them. We can go to the next slide.
After this one, yeah. Let me shift on.
And so now I'll talk about the different. Briefly, I'm going to talk about the different the differences between studio caseros. And the studio casero is basically a bedroom studio like mine or Malcolm's or Papombertico's. So if you can just play the video, I'll ask questions about how you feel about the song. So before I say it, I'll say this. So Havana Hiphop, which is my brand, it's my studio, it's been my company since ever, and it was focused on an operative practice, which is we met in my house, and I will create a beats with the instruments that you saw before, and then those beats will wait to be recorded whenever there was someone from abroad or any institution would want to record them. Then we will do the recording. But in the meantime, the music was created to be performed live mainly. So we worked on live performances. So this is how I describe this operative practice. We can play the video.
Can I just ask briefly, for those who aren't aware, the Cuban government actually set up an agency of rap.
Thank you, Jane.
Is this, is the Estudio Casero something that is not part of that agency's output or activities, or you may be talking about that later, but I think it's not my...
I talk about it in the slide above that one. We don't have to go, but this is the Estudio Casero is what Susan Baker describes as the DIY institution.
Yeah.
And this is what I say is basically the proto institution that we have, the proto hip-hop archive happens with the accumulation of songs in our bedrooms, in our computers. This is why
what you have to say, the government agency of rap is associating itself with the Rap Cubano, whereas...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, whereas this is not a part of that official government-sponsored activity. Yeah.
Okay, good. So then this is I think this is particular this concept that you're seeing here, which is really acute what you're asking here, Jane. It's particularly the moment in which those live performances that were created in stages across Havana. They were also state-run because everything in Havana at that time, and even I think at that time, all of it was state-run as a socialist nation and as a socialist society. And we met then, in this particular concert is the moment in which the Agencia Cubana de Rap is producing auditions for whose art is going to be part of the agents. This is 17 September 2002. And Oguera is performing this song, Salsa con Rap, salsa music and rap music mixed together. The sample, we can talk about it later. But before before you play it, the Rap Cubano institution, or the Agencia de Rap, or Rap Agency the Agency of Rap Cubano, was the way for the government to incorporate rap music, Cuban rap music or local rap music, as a way to understand and institutionalize the music and the scene itself, to understand it and to control it, right? We can ask more questions. Let's play the video.
Este es el nuevo movimiento, escuela rap, solo dale tiempo a tiempo. Voy a sacarlo todo de adentro, como Elena busque la señora sentimiento. Tributo a quien también o no merece, consagrados de futuro, viendo la vida con crece. Yo no sé si creceré.
Yeah, perfect. So do you have any more? So the question about the Cuban Rap Agency it's important because the Estudio Casero is standing in tension with the rap agency, in the sense that in a context of, say, in a society like Edinburgh, for example, Estudio Casero can become its own institution and exist without having to be affiliated with, say, the National Museum or any artist agency that decides to embrace their work. In the case of Rap Cubano, Estudio Caseros and the Cuban Rap Agency, they're basically the creation of the Cuban Rights Agency especially was a way for the state to take control of the impetus that Rap Cubano had at a popular street level, if we talk about it in that way. And basically, what it did was basically take off, this audition in particular was the way to take off the main groups in the Rap Cubano scene in Havana and put them within the institution and separate them from the rest of the movement that was happening in the streets. Can we go to the next slide? This is Malcolm. One of the songs. He was really focused on working with women, so I wanted to play this track here, please.
Bien, sabes que la reina no se descontrola, pero algo está fallando, que hasta pierdo las neuronas. ¿Qué será? Por si acaso déjame agarrar la soga. Hay al que no se aguante si se cae en doble lona. Lo daré al que sabe mover los pies y al que no, con mi ritmo distraeré al punto que a otro nivel llegaré y no sabrán cómo fue que los hipnoticé.
Si yo pudiera me elevara todos los días consumiendo mucho rap, esto es pura medicina, aterrizaría solo por una cuestión, una peña en la tierra.
So something that I think kind of comes across quite interesting here is that this is ultimately a West Coast beat made in Cuba. There's a guy with I think it's the cars and Audi. All the elements that sort of don't fit within the structures of socialist society, they're being portrayed. I think part of the implications is that there should be a space for civil society to express its own criticism and the ways in which it understands society and desires of what people want to do and what they want to be. But also, I think this is kind of really important. It's the beginning of enunciations of new subjectivities in post-socialist Cuba or post-socialist subjectivities, after the revolution in 1959, and specifically after 1991, where we had this global fall of socialism in Russia and the Eastern Bloc. Any questions here?
No, I think we're flowing through.
Let's go to the next one. We have. I'm going to jump to discoverability and then play the last bit, if we can do that. I want to show Pablo Bertico's video. Let me read this quickly. It says, according to the founder of another pioneering studio, Cuban rapper and producer Humberto Joel Cabrera, Pablo Bertico Santana, declares that his Real 70 studio had existed before 18. This is Malcolm, the one was over before 18 to 18A16 productions. In February 2001, Pablo Bertico laid the foundations for Real 70 Havana go-to studio casero for underground rap recordings. He started Real 70 with an Extensa 365 series Acer Intel Pentium laptop that his mother would bring home from work, and in a room with cinder block walls halfway patched up with a few egg cartons and a Cuban flag. I don't know if you can see it. I mean, this is sort of in the back of the video itself. Using version 1.0 of Sonic Foundry Vegas Pro and SoundForge 4.5, Humbertico began to make the first beats of his first first album, Denuncia Social, 2002, and to record vocal tracks for whoever would pay him. The other part about the other theme that's really kind of key and within this question of post-socialist subjectivities after 1991 in Cuba that I read out of the archive is this question of entrepreneurship, which I think is really important. And the fact that there's a business that's been then made out of the studio casero. I said it's also, again, in tension and imbalance or counterbalance with the institutions that are the ages of Cuban socialism. Can we play that, please?
Mira, ven amor, quiero mostrarte que existe un mejor lugar para amar sin ser encontrado y juzgado, para estar tranquilo en el sigilo de un beso y mientras vamos en camino al universo quiero que me des versos inmersos en pecados inmensos pintados en lienzos atados a paredes celulares de tu alma, similares a la imagen que proyectas cuando te puede la calma. Dame las líneas y las curvas de tus ojos, la culpa de tu sonrojo, la llave de tu cerrojo, el grafito de tus dedos y el motivo de tus miedos.
Yeah, so then in this moment, and this is something it's a very, really important characteristic that I talked in an early slide about. I didn't really mention it when we passed through. Is the difference between Afro-Cuban rap and rap Cubano, and the difference is particularly this one. When Afro-Cuban rap was at its highest point of popularity in Havana, in Cuba, and across Cuba, the main topic of it was race and race relations, and obviously there were also commentaries about women and other stuff that had to do with not exactly social or political, overtly political messages, but its commentary was mainly this critique of society in Cuban racism. In the case of Cuban rap, which is the distinction I make, the themes kind of evade the question of race and go to politics, directly addressing the government for the things that it hasn't done or where it has failed, or directly speaking to other ways in which society should function, like as you see here with Brianna Weapons, which she's basically writing a song to her boyfriend or the person she likes, and it's sort of not exactly. It's also politics in this sort of more covert ways, if we can go into that. I don't know if anyone wants to go into that, but it's basically this other way of entrepreneurship where music itself becomes more commercialized and more commercially driven, and uses particular sort of models of music that are not exactly totally in tune with local music or traditions of Cuban music. Any questions here?
No, I think we're good to continue.
Good. Great. So I read the bottom of this. So the rap Cubano practitioner's willingness to collaborate with Harvard University. This is where what I want to say is antithetical. Harvard and a music library is antithetical to the reasons implicit in for Cuban historical need to have a library. And by talking about this, I'm basically going all the way back to the initial oracular prescription of how to use libraries in general, by detailing the intricacies that allow rap Cubano materials to be discoverable within the institutional repository of the Itacun Loeb Music Library. I reveal some of the potential implications and concerns conjured by this institutionalization process. The material paradox lies then within the conflict between the politically transgressive nature of rap Cubano and our disposition to submit the ideological weapons that our materials represent to that institution to gain recognition that it would afford us. And what I'm saying here is that as soon as rap Cubano glided from Afro-Cuban rap in this golden era to rap Cubano, there's not only this issue of the different messages or content of the lyrics itself and the kind of music and the themes, traditional themes that we bring into them, but there's also the question of the fact that it is music out of Cuba, which I think is kind of the main topic here, and how even in itself, within the space of the National Library, it is a counter archive because it's speaking about a recent history of public critique of the fails of the Cuban Revolution. But then it's also a counter archive in the sense that what arrives at Harvard University is information or potential or data that may become potentially key for information about Cuban citizens, which I think is really, really complicated. And this is one of the reasons why I had major issues with this question of discoverability that I want to talk about in the next slide, please. So one of the main differences with what happened in Havana and the archive and the collection that was created at the National Library was that the collection in Havana at the National Library was in display for 2 hours, and then it was stored. I think it was stored at the basement of the library, and it's not accessible to the public anymore. So this is sort of this kind of weird or complicated way that's in tension with the practice of discoverability and processing materials for libraries like Harvard Music Library, like the Itacun Loeb Music Library at Harvard, where things will be, or say materials of rap Cubano and other music will be in display in perpetuity, pretty much. But what does it mean to have a material coming out of Cuba, socialist Cuba, say in the hemisphere? Cuba's could be described as the arch enemy of the United States because of being a socialist nation. What does it mean to have information produced by not just Black citizens or dark-skinned citizens of Cuba, but also by Cuban citizens in general, within the space of a library like Harvard University Music Library, where it's not going to be accessible or discoverable by people who are interested in understanding the music, interested in knowing or loving more about Cuba, getting another side of Cuba that they didn't know, but also used by power itself within the United States to continue exerting its pressure over Cuba. And I want to ask you, do you understand what this means before I go into describing the question? Is that clear here?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, it is. Thank you.
Right. So then I think the main issue with this question of discoverability, before we go to the last one, again, I want to cut it short now, is the tension between what Malcolm is doing or what we are trying to follow in the creation of our own categories, and how it may become institutionalized by working with the library like Harvard University. And any questions before we go to the last? Any questions? No?
How do we get over something like that?
So question from the floor is, how does one get over that problem of tension between institutional structure and user?
Well, this is the same tension. How do we escape the fact that most of these files are digital born, were created within the world of Windows? Is it possible? We continue to create this sort of revolutions or radical processes within that structure itself. So I think that thank you for that question, because it's something that's implied in this practice of hip-hop archives in tension with digital humanities, where structure itself is power, is hegemony already in a more sort of non-theoretical but very sort of structural way that confines the music and the material that it stores. I don't know if we can escape it. Does that mean, how do we escape it when everything that we do is already within the structure itself? I don't really know. I don't know. I think right now I'm mainly asking the question of how do we produce a structure that's different. So the example that I'm playing now is ways in which this digital sound-based ethnographic practices may allow us to create other ways to speak about what we want to say, or the history of rap Cubano, or memory-making processes within rap Cubano, or ways to delineate other narratives about our history without accessing MS. Well, using this is it's complicated because I'm using this is what's made in Filmora. I'm using writing. The structure that I use implies the use or presentation of metadata. So most of the categories and elements that I use within the structure itself are deeply soaked in processes that I did not create, or that I had no other means to create without using the technology that's existent. I think it's really the main comment on this question of how do we do something that's outside power, outside hegemony. We're going directly into the minute 5.22 because I kind of want to skip the introduction to what you see. This is what I describe as the sonic history of rap Cubano, specifically the poetics of protest in urban Afro-Cuban music. And I go from 1959 all the way to 2021 with some moments to talk about what I feel is the continuation of the same message going across. The message here is based on the poem Tengo by Nicolas Guillen. The translation will be I have, and it's a poem that he wrote in 1964 at the arrival of a revolution, to say that as a mixed race person, as a mulatto, as a black man in Cuba, he felt that he actually had the promise had finally become fulfilled by the Cuban Revolution. Now, what's really important here is that he's also, if we listen to the way the poem is set in Spanish, we see that there's also a certain amount of doubt or a certain amount of uncertainty about his speech and saying, well, I have, but let's see if this is really possible. And then we see that in the future, later on 2021, there's ways in which that I have becomes a different phrase, which is what actually has been taken away by the process of the revolution. Can we play it, please? Oh, you start. Oh, that's the beginning. No. That's the beginning. There.
Hizo adivinación para una persona X.
Sí.
Entonces el oído ya funciona cuando un babalao recibe un Odù Ifá. Oíste, de que tú eres la boca, el oído escucha.
Claro.
Lo que habla mala suerte de la persona que escuchó hacer el sacrificio, pero lo escuchó, no se quedó sin oírlo.
Claro.
Entonces, por ciertas razones, decidió no hacer lo que le dijo el sacerdote que hiciera.
Exactamente.
Es decir, entró por un oído,
salió por el otro.
Por el otro, lo que hizo la suerte. Usted no oye consejo.
Así.
El ejemplo lo tenemos a la vista.
Look at the dates, please.
Nadie que analice imparcialmente dudará de la buena fe de Fidel y de su mejor deseo en acabar la disociadora discriminación racial que estorba la consolidación de nuestro pueblo y entorpece el desarrollo económico nacional al privar de poder adquisitivo a una porción considerable de la población. No obstante, a ningún observador honesto se le escapará que el negro ha sido excluido, hoy más aún que en ocasiones anteriores, de la administración pública. Como el doctor Fidel Castro no puede estar en todas partes, le sucede a él lo que desde que el mundo es mundo le ha sucedido siempre a los hombres de Estado, que sus colaboradores, al no tener exactamente sus mismos sentimientos y sus mismas convicciones, tratan por todos los medios posibles de esquivar, de burlar y de desobedecer cuantas disposiciones les resulten chocantes o molestas. Y no hay que decir que la cuestión racial, eso de hacerle justicia al negro, de sacarlo del oprobio en que lo tienen sumido, le ha resultado chocante y molesto a muchos, que da la casualidad que tienen poder para no emplearlos, aumentando así el hambre y la miseria en los cubanos de piel oscura.
Vamos a ver, que siendo un negro, nadie me puede detener a la puerta de un dancing o de un bar, o bien en la carpeta de un hotel gritarme que no hay pieza, una mínima pieza y no una pieza colosal, una pequeña pieza donde yo pueda descansar.
Pasan los años y la situación prosigue intacta, el tiempo no perdona, pregúntale a La Habana, que ahorita está en la lona, nadie le importa nada, no. Tengo una raza oscura y discriminada, tengo una jornada que me exige y no da nada, tengo tantas cosas que no puedo ni tocarlas, tengo instalaciones que no puedo ni pisarlas, tengo libertad entre un paréntesis de hierro, tengo tantos derechos sin provechos que me encierro, tengo lo que tengo sin tener lo que he tenido, tienes que reflexionar y asimilar el contenido. Yo recuerdo cuando yo era un niña, con mis cosas te sirvo para la tricopilla, yo no podía porque no tenía, pero yo soy bueno y lo bueno no se decía. Ahora tengo el respeto de tu cara, te conoce con tu pared de mí, te conoce con tu ropa cara,
por eso tengo.